Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for bearing with us during that short delay. We've just had a few technical issues, so I apologise to those who have also been waiting online. Good afternoon, my name's Noeline Duff and I'm the Chair of the Panel of Administrators here at the City of Casey, and I do welcome you to this Council meeting this afternoon, the 20th of August 2024. Welcome to all of you in the gallery and online. And we have quite a large agenda this afternoon, but I'd like to start with introducing those present. Firstly, my colleague administrators, Mr Miguel Belmar.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And Mr Cameron Boardman.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And we're joined by a number of senior officers this afternoon. Firstly, Mr Glenn Patterson, our Chief Executive Officer, James Collins, Director City Planning and Infrastructure, Jen Bednar, Director Customer and Corporate Services, Steve Coldham, Director Community Life, and we're supported this afternoon by Matthew Crane in AV and Nicole Road in Governance. And I welcome those other officers of Council that are here present this afternoon. I'd like to start the meeting with the statement of acknowledgement. The City of Casey proudly acknowledges the traditional owners, Casey's Aboriginal communities and their rich culture, and pays respect to their elders past, present and future. We acknowledge Aboriginal people as Australia's first peoples and as the traditional owners of the land on which we work and live. Item 1.2, the diversity statement. The City of Casey is home to remarkable diversity with many cultures, languages, faiths and communities of worship, ages, LGBTQI+ identities and landscapes together forming our rich and dynamic community story. From our first Australians to our most recent arrivals and every wave between, the City of Casey welcomes and represents all community members and their respective ambitions to live healthy, rewarding and happy lives. We recognise this diversity as our strength and we aim to share, nurture and celebrate it. I now move to item 2, which is the confirmation of minutes. There's one set of previous minutes for the council meeting held on the 16th of July, and I seek a mover and a seconder to confirm the minutes.
I'll move those minutes, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder?
I'll second those.
Mr Belmar, all in favour? Carried. Declaration of interests. I've considered my obligations under Section 130 of the Local Government Act 2020 and have no declarations to make. I do note that both my panel member, Mr Miguel Belmar and Steve Coldham, do have an interest, not a conflict of interest, but just want to declare that they are Council's representatives on connected libraries. Are there any other council officers or administrators that want to declare an interest?
I have nothing to declare, Chair.
Thank you. None other?
No, nothing.
That's duly noted. Thank you. Public question time. There are 16 public questions submitted through Council's website this afternoon, and I'll hand over to our Chief Executive Officer to manage the public question time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to remind everyone that in accordance with Rule 65.11, any person who submits a public question must be in the gallery at the time the question and response is due to be read. If a person is not present in the gallery, the question will not be read. However, it will be recorded in the minutes of this council meeting together with a copy of a written response. First question today has been received from Stefan Kuhman. Are they or a representative in the gallery today? They are not, so we'll proceed to questions 2 and 3 that have been received from Jared Doble. Again, are they or a representative in attendance today? No. All right, question 4 and question 5 have been received from Paul Greenman. Are they or a representative present today? No. So we'll move to question 6, which has been received from Nathan Orrell. Are they or a representative present? Not having much luck here, no. Questions 7 and 8 have been received from Belinda Connell. Again, I'll confirm that they or a representative are here. They're not. Question 9 and 10 have been received from Anthony Tassone. Are they or a representative present in the gallery today? No, they're not. And questions 11 and 12 have been received from Hayley Perry. Again, are they or a representative present today? No. So we'll move on to question 13, which has been received from Lauren Tassone. Are they or a representative present? No. Question 14 and 15 have been received from Kasuni Mendes. Are they or a representative present? They are not. Question 16 has been received from Alan Murphy. Thank you. The question relates to roadside and parkland maintenance. The overgrown vegetation on many roads in the municipality, for example Narrewarr and Cranbourne Road between Thompsons Road and the Monash Freeway, is higher than the Armco barriers. When will Council address this and other issues regarding parkland grass mowing and garden maintenance? And Mr Collins will respond to that question.
Thanks for the question, Alan. The management of median areas alongside main roads in Casey falls under the control of the Department of Transport and Planning, with the bulk of mowing activities scheduled for November to January. Council tries to collaborate with Major Roads Projects Victoria to design medians that require less upkeep. We have recently reissued contracts for the maintenance of council-owned roadsides and open spaces, more recently in the southern regions of Casey, including Cranbourne. Residents with concerns about specific locations are encouraged to reach out to the customer service team or directly to the Department of Transport and Planning for those roads that are under their control.
That concludes the questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Patterson. I'm now going to move on to officer reports, and with respect to the first report, we are just awaiting on being able to connect the chair of our audit committee, Mr John Nguyen. That is the technical issue we're having, so we are going to just defer that report until later in the meeting when we can make that connection, and I'll seek a mover and a seconder to defer that report to later in the meeting.
Chair, I'll move that we defer item 5.1 to later in the meeting.
Thank you, Mr Cameron. Mr Boardman?
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favour? Carried. So I now move to item 5.2, which is the progress report on the transition of connected libraries to a beneficial enterprise. Do I have a mover and a seconder?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Seconder?
Chair, seconded.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar?
Thank you, Chair, and I note the declaration that you made at the commencement of the meeting that I am a member of the Board of Connected Libraries, and I've participated in some discussions about these issues previously. Tonight is an exciting night for Council because it demonstrates that in keeping with our continuing good governance, we are taking the step of ensuring our compliance with the Local Government Act, which requires that our library service undergo a transformation, undertake a new company structure by 2030. And in fact, we're doing it well before that as a mark of not rushing things and ensuring that we do things at an appropriate time. I note that we are moving, or that I am moving, 6 different motions under the recommendation, but ultimately the thrust of what we are doing tonight is we are adopting 2 new key documents. One is a Connected Libraries Limited Constitution, and secondly, a library agreement to be signed in the future between Connected Libraries and the City of Casey. This is more than just a paper change, if I can use that phrase, for the way the Council conducts its library service. It's a new way of doing business because what Connected Libraries will be governed by is a beneficial enterprise, and that's a company limited by guarantee. Now, what that will create is a new independent entity which will have its own board of management. That board, those directors will have individual responsibilities to that new company, and it'll ensure that the library is conducted in accordance with the Australian Corporations Law. Now, that's slightly different to the legal method that's been used in the past, but ultimately it will ensure that the library will continue, that originally Casey will be the first member of that corporation, but it has been established in a way that in future partners can join the entity, and the Library Corporation can continue to grow and to provide a service. So I just want to assure the community that the change is being carefully considered. It will still have representatives appointed by council to the board, and it will ensure that the residents of Casey are continuing to be, their voices will continue to be heard on the board of the Library Corporation. I want to note also that the continuing appointment of independent members, so that the library will always have, the library board will always have the best possible advice and input from subject matter experts in libraries and library management. So it's important that will also continue. So I want to commend this motion to the community. I want to assure the community that this is a step that's been taken carefully and prudently, that all the appropriate advice has been sought and obtained from lawyers who have assisted other communities in undertaking this change. So we're not reinventing the wheel, we are adopting a method that has been shown to be in accordance with the requirements of the Corporations Law and with the Local Government Act. And so with those comments and noting that it is an important change, I am happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Chair. Could I take the liberty of acknowledging Mr Belmar's leadership and effort in the formation of Connected Libraries, not just as interim chair of the transitional vehicle, but certainly as one of the council-appointed directors, in addition to Mr Coldham, who also was one of the directors of the transitional vehicle, going through what was quite a significant reform, not just as a consequence of legislative obligations, but also to ensure that there was no disruption to the service that the libraries, all of the library facilities provide to Casey residents and other users, and also ensuring that there was minimal disruption and any avoidance of that disruption to staff and anyone else involved in the administration and management of the facility itself. This is almost the finality of what I think Mr Belmar has been nearly a 3-year process. One that took us a little bit by surprise because of the legislative change foisted upon us and as a consequence of the 2020 Local Government Act. But nonetheless, I can speak with a high degree of confidence and endorsing your words, Mr Belmar, that this has been a methodical process. It has been one that has been extremely professional and diligent, and the documents that we are adopting today, particularly the new Beneficial Enterprise Constitution, represents the best in good governance approach to this very complex task, and also ensuring that the outcome meets all of the interests of the stakeholders involved. And for that, I think yourself, Mr Belmar, Mr Coldham and the CEO and the other directors and everyone else involved in this project need to be commended. It really was an exemplar insofar as its approach to governance. Whilst I said that this is nearly the final stages, I think the finality, the actual completion of this process will come into effect on the 1st of July next year when the new enterprise takes shape, and that will be a date well past the passing of us as administrators, if I put it in those terms, but it is something which will be the final culmination of many years of hard work in delivering what not just meets, as I said, our statutory obligations, but ensures that this high service delivery of the 5 library sites within the City of Casey remains at that standard. In past meetings, Mr Belmar, we've spoken of the service, the demographics, the catchments, the move to digitalisation of those services, particularly the Bunjil facility and other facilities that do provide exceptional infrastructure for community groups to meet and so forth. With the right governance that this recommendations do now impose upon the organisation, I've got every confidence that those services will continue to improve, and under the new leadership of the Council and the new leadership of the Connected Libraries Board itself, I am very equally confident that the facilities and the services will remain in very good hands. So I place firmly on the record my appreciation to Mr Belmar, Mr Coleman, all of the other individuals involved in this. I also note, Chair, that we have been exceptionally well briefed, very detailed oriented on this process over a number of years, and one that has a very heightened level of interest, not just because of the statutory obligations that we were faced with, but as I said, because of the vital community service that the library facilities provide to the City of Casey. And with those words, Chair, I'm very pleased to move the second the recommendation.
Thank you. Hear on those comments. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.3 is the quarterly community report from April to June 2024. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Chair, I will move item 5.3 on his recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder?
I'll second that.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, some very brief comments on our quarterly community report, April to June 2024. We do, of course, publish these reports 4 times a year, and this is an analysis of our actions and achievements against the council plan, particularly as it relates to the 7 strategic objectives which are outlined on the first page of the actual report itself, or page 71 of the Public Council papers. And these deal with matters such as delivering sustainable infrastructure, looking at our current emerging sectors, fostering environmental sustainable practices, and on this agenda item, or this agenda, this council meeting, Chair, there is a number of those policies which are specifically relevant to that strategic objective. Our advocacy, our intentions to create a resilient and connected community, ensuring good governance and transparent decision making, which is something that we have spoken at length in the past council meetings, and again at this council meeting we will be talking in further detail over the latest tranche of our governance and corporate documents adaptation, and ensuring that we create an adaptive, innovative and financially sustainable organisation commensurately. There are 37 actions that have been planned for this financial year. This comprises of 34 actions which were included in our annual action plan, and 3 carryover actions from the previous financial year. And at the conclusion of this financial year, so this is the quarter from April to June, as I said, so it is the conclusion of the 23-24 financial year, 35 of those actions were completed, 2 actions were still in progress. Those 2 actions relate to the Cranbourne Community Hub, again an issue that we have discussed in detail at past council meetings, and one that we have a very strong interest in its success in the future. And the second action yet to be completed relates to the undertaking of a strategic review of council properties portfolio and land holdings to ensure that they are appropriate and assessed adequately for current and future service needs. We've already spoken about one of the key highlights, which was the implementation of the Connected Libraries service model. We also need to note that at a past council meeting, I think it was earlier this year, we adopted we endorsed council's commitment to the Victorian Energy Collaboration, which ensures that 100% of the electricity supplied to council will be sourced by renewable sources by 2025, but it also does so at a scale where there are certain commercial and economic benefits to council and the other councils that are part of the Victorian Energy Collaboration, and also ensuring that we track and meet progress against the statutory obligation of net zero emissions achievement by 2030. So all of those actions is clearly dedicated and detailed in the quarterly report shows how we've progressed against the council plan. We've given, as I've said, to the two outstanding actions reasons why they have not been progressed as they should have. We've also spoken in a greater detail and presented this to the community of our own activities as administrators. We've given detail on the capital works performance, particularly the financial aspects around the capital works performance and the delivery of the specific capital projects, and provided other statutory reporting obligations around community engagement and our sustainability and climate resilience. So with those words, Chair, I'm again very pleased to adopt the latest iteration of our quarterly report, encourage all interested community members to take the time to read it. It really is a very clear, concise and easily digestible document to highlight the achievements and how we're tracking our own performance against the council plan. And do note that we probably have 1 quarter left, which we will adopt, I think, at the October meeting, if not before. But these are very useful community documents, and as I said, encourage all community members to use them as a reference point.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank Mr Boardman for moving the motion, and I just want to highlight a couple of items from this report. They're really there's two of them, and then one further one I'll speak to. The first is the strategic objective, which is about advocating to state and federal governments for key service and infrastructure delivery. And I want to note that Council in May hosted the Greater South East Melbourne, the GSEM Jobs and Skills Summit, and I want to thank all of those that were involved with that. I note that it was attended by the then Federal Minister for Skills and Training, and it just shows the important role that Council has in advocating for jobs in this part of the world. And secondly, I just want to note also the advocacy work that's been done with respect to the Thompson Road extension, the Dufton in Pool in the Park, and Casey Fields Soccer Stage 3. And note the continuing advocacy and work that is done by Council officers and by my fellow administrators in that important work. And finally, just with respect to capital works programs that have been completed, I want to note the completion of the Max Pawsey Reserve, the Oval reconstruction, and secondly, the stormwater harvesting here in Narre Warren. And it's been, the stormwater harvesting is a project that we've been able to observe as it's taken some time, both because of the type of work that it is with respect to water harvesting, and secondly, because at times we had a lot of rain. So it just shows for us as administrators, or particularly for myself, I was able to really observe in real time the important work that's done in that area of water harvesting, and the fact that all the best planning in the world can sometimes be put on the back burner by the weather, but eventually council officers through careful management of contracts can ensure that that work is fulfilled. And so with those comments, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I'd just like to highlight a couple of items from the report. It builds on the comments you made with respect to the capital program, and that is that there are 358 separate projects in the capital works budget for this past year. And that is an extraordinary amount of work. Some of them are very big projects, others are smaller, but the management oversight of such a big program is an ongoing challenge. So I just simply note that. And the other is the amount of consultation that occurs within the organisation in regard to both face-to-face but also the feedback from the community. And we note that during the quarter there were nearly 4,200 feedback submissions received from the community during the last quarter on a range of topics on the Council's Casey Conversations website, which was visited nearly 21,000 times. So they're phenomenal numbers in terms of the reach to people in the community, and that's quite aside from the face-to-face work that occurs and that continues to occur on specific projects. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.4 is the gambling harm minimisation policy, and we are now, for those following the agenda, we're now at page 102 of the agenda, and I seek a mover and a seconder for the gambling harm minimisation policy.
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar, and a seconder.
Chair, seconded the recommendation.
Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. In moving this motion this evening, I'm mindful of the important role that Council plays in this area of policy. I note from the Council papers this evening that the Victorian Public Health and Wellbeing Act mandates that councils must, and the following is a quote, seek to protect, improve and promote public health and wellbeing within the municipal district, and that's end quote. Coordinated action and intervention across local government functions can influence meaningful change for community wellbeing and health. When I review the policy, I see a policy that is careful and considered, that applies a legislative context which refers to a number of pieces of legislation, including the Gambling Regulation Act, the Planning and Environment Act, the Local Government Act, amongst others, and the Public Health and Wellbeing Act. This policy tonight is one which identifies the need to take a public health approach to gambling, and where that is considered not only the individual but encompasses the products, environments, marketing, the wider context in which gambling occurs. I'll just wait for a moment. Thank you. I also want to note the point at which I started moving this motion, and that is that there is a state piece of legislation that requires council to take steps like identifying policies and implementing policies such as the one we are adopting tonight. And I also want to note one important and really, for me, a critical issue in adopting a policy like that. And I'll just go to the policy itself, and it's part of the policy that's headed Planning and Regulation, and it's found under 5.1 Policy Principles. And it reads as follows: Council recognises the important role it plays in the planning and regulation of EGM venues within the municipality. Council aims to minimise harm by ensuring planning permits and licensing applications relating to EGMs are assessed and responded to according to their social and economic impacts. And then it has a list of things that Council will do, but importantly, assess social and economic impact assessments for EGM licences applications within the VGCCC's regulatory process, discourage those that have not demonstrated a net community benefit. Then it says, see the definitions. And when you go to the definitions of community benefit, it has one in there. It talks about planning concepts of the impact on the entire community. Ultimately, my reflection on this policy is about two issues. One is that harm minimisation is an important mandated approach to the issues that are raised by gambling. And secondly, and importantly, that by adopting this policy this evening, we're not closing off any future applications. We are adopting an orthodox position, which is that any future applications will be dealt with on their merits and will require that assessments of net community benefit are provided to Council. So with those comments and noting the important work that's been done by Council officers on this policy in both drafting the policy, taking it to the community, taking on board the community's comments and ensuring that the policy reflects all of that input, I'm happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, in seconding this recommendation, I'll prefix my comments by stating that I have absolutely no ideological position with regards to electronic gaming machines or any form of betting or gambling activities whatsoever. I acknowledge that it is a legal activity, it is highly regulated. There are some very good operators in the sector who equally demonstrate quite clear duty of cares to their customers, complying with their statutory obligations to ensure that harm is identified and minimised on their venues. But I say that I'm not anyone who uses such facilities. I never have, I never will. I've never probably laid a bet in my life except at a Melbourne Cup sweep, probably when I was in my 20s. And I think this is an important context because, as Mr Belmar has articulated, this is a policy that is developed consistent with Council's obligations under the Health and Wellbeing statutory framework, but also to look at dealing with addressing issues of vulnerability and exposure to certain social and demographic sectors within the City of Casey from a harm minimisation basis. And it's not in any way inconsistent to the way that Council has addressed matters such as substance abuse and dependency and other forms of social harm. Whilst this particular policy does address aspects of planning, and I'll come to those matters in a moment, Mr Belmar made a very important point, is that this is not Council trying to ban EGM facilities or any other sort of gaming or gambling facilities. It is providing clarity around the expectations, again, from a harm minimisation basis. But I go back to the comment I made that there are many venues within the City of Casey and elsewhere in the state and nationally who are very good operators, who understand this concept probably better than we do. And although, yes, there is a very commercial and arguably a profit-driven focus to their activities, it is delivered through the lens of exhibiting a duty of care as best as possible. But we also need to start with the obvious around particularly the focus on EGMs. And this particular policy has been one that ourselves as administrators have been involved with, providing feedback to council officers, seeking further clarification, becoming more detailed oriented on certain aspects and looking at the practical applications. And I do note that whilst there is a statewide cap of 30,000 EGMs for Victoria, and as many people who work in this industry would know, that 2,628 are allocated to Crown Casino. The remainder is allocated to clubs, the other half. There's not one venue that can have more than 105 entitlements of EGMs, and there's not one single club or organisation that can have more than 840. So that then provides the basis of how regulated this particular activity is, and how the Victorian Gambling and Casino Control Commission does have a very strong focus on maintaining the regulation of venues in particular and promoting its own harm minimisation framework. This is a supplementation to that. We've got to make that very, very clear. But it's also very topical because the debate that we are having publicly, which is very, in my mind, necessary around the proliferation of sporting betting advertising, particularly as it relates to digital advertising during televised sporting events, and I nominate the AFL in particular, is one we have to have. And this was identified as of significant social concern through the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Social Policy and Legal Affairs June 2023 report, which was titled "You Win Some, You Lose More: Online Gambling and the Impacts of Those Experiencing Gambling Harm." And that, in combined with the Australian Institute of Family Studies National Gambling Trends October 2023 report, showed quite clearly that in the last 12 months, the growth in particularly young males under 40 that are using sporting bet applications is growing far more significant than other forms of gambling. In fact, it's now, on an Australian basis, topping almost 44% of those that are involved in such activities. The gambling market, this is on a national basis, from $4.9 billion US to a forecast $8.5 billion in 2032, just shows that growth is being fuelled by online gambling rather than through EGMs. And whilst this policy does have a specific focus on EGMs, we've got to be quite open to the fact that there is a specific role for council in relation to its planning, its health and harm minimisation controls, and the framework providing support to those people who are falling through the cracks that do need such support when using such facilities, whereas the capacity for us to actually have the same level of intervention for those that are using mobile and other devices is probably not as strong. So the context and the background is very important. I don't want to be in any way demonising any operator. We, as part of the consultation process, are aware that a number of operators in the City of Casey have provided very specific feedback to us, and we thank them very much for that. It has been received and it has been reflected, and it is something that we are very conscious insofar as getting the balance right to not in any way jeopardise any of these operations, and acknowledging that they do provide community services and recreational activities outside of gambling, but also ensuring that they need to extend their duty of care to those that are particularly vulnerable. At the same token, we do note that there is a venue, and I won't name it, that currently is within the municipality on council land that has EGMs, and that they are confronted with a lease issue in the future that they will have to address consistent with this policy. But that is many years away, and that will be up to a future council in many elections subsequent to this that will have to decide upon the appropriateness or otherwise. But I want to conclude the comments endorsing the remarks from Mr Belmar, particularly as it relates to clause 5.22 under planning regulation on page 114 or page 10 of the policy itself. It is not a blanket ban. It's a discouragement, and that's understandable. And I think that the tone of the language here is very clear. But in any case, there is a municipal cap. There is a statewide cap. We meet our obligations again. That it seems to be somewhat counterintuitive that we would be having a policy which discourages new applications where there isn't the possibility of new applications because of those other legislative mechanisms. But nonetheless, it is a signal, a consistent guideline to potential operators that we need to look at this from the social harm context. We need to ensure that any application in the future does have specific detail attached to their social and economic impact assessments, and that council and future councils in particular avail themselves of all of the facts when making such decisions. And I conclude by saying, again, I don't have an ideological position on this. This is a planning issue that is dealt with through the consistency of this particular policy, but also through the legislative and statutory obligations of the other applicable state legislation that is necessary in this context. So I do endorse the policy, its intention and its coverage and its public health focus is absolutely meritorious and should not be questioned. But I also do endorse the operations of most operators. I won't say all, there are some that could perhaps do a bit more, but most operators within this municipality and otherwise who do understand their duty of care obligations and do ensure that they meet those obligations in providing harm reductions, support services and other available services to vulnerable and identified members who would need it in the context of abuse or other exposures. So I do second the policy, I endorse it, but I do also note that we have worked with the sector to receive the feedback, to understand their concerns, to ensure that that is reflected in the policy, and for that reason I am quite confident that that balance has been met, and I look forward to hearing more from council officers in the future around the actual implementation of the policy.
Thank you, Mr Boardman, and thank you both for your comprehensive and thoughtful comments with respect to the motion before us. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. We did defer item 5.1, and I am hopeful that we are going to return to item 5.1 with Mr Nguyen. I think the officers are just wanting to test that we can see and hear Mr Nguyen, so I will allow them to do that and then confirm with me that we can proceed.
Good afternoon, Ms Duff. Can you hear me?
We can hear it. A little bit louder, Mr Nguyen.
Okay, no, thank you. Would you like me to?
Thank you. I
Move
will
on.
just move to moving and seconding the report and then invite you to deliver your report. So we go back to page 4, which is item 5.1. That is the Audit and Risk Committee Chairperson's report. And I'll seek a mover and a seconder.
Chair, I'll move the recommendations. Put a note that I am indeed a member of the Audit and Risk Committee.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And now we'll hand over to you and then we'll move to the vote. Once your report is complete, I'll allow Mr Belmar and Mr Boardman to speak as well. Thank you, Mr Nguyen, for bearing with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Ms Duff, and good afternoon, administrators, and thank you for the opportunity to present the Audit and Risk Committee's biannual report. So in accordance with our charter, the Audit and Risk Committee is responsible for considering matters relating to external audit, financial reporting, risk management, accounting and investment policies, internal audit, and ethical and statutory compliance for the City of Casey. These matters are considered according to a work plan that is approved by the committee on an annual basis. Since my last report to you in March of this year, the committee has met on one occasion in June. We're scheduled to meet again in September and December. I now note some highlights from the June meeting. The committee was briefed on the status of Council's transformation program. The committee was given an update on Council's financial performance, including an update on compliance with Council's investment policy. The committee was briefed on VAGO's interim audit testing and reviewed the interim management letter. The findings in the letter related to Council's internal controls over financial reporting, as well as Council's financial and performance reporting. Management agreed to VAGO's findings and are now taking actions to resolve these matters. The committee was given an update on management's approach to valuing Council's property, infrastructure and plant and equipment asset classes. In relation to the committee's oversight of internal audit, the committee noted the strategic internal audit plan for the upcoming year and considered findings relating to work on building and facilities management, as well as Council's development and public open space contribution framework. No high-risk issues were identified. Finally, the committee considered and endorsed the updated Audit and Risk Committee Charter. The updated charter reflected best practice from local government Victoria to ensuring a consistent approach is applied across the local government sector. As this is my last report to Council before the local government elections in October, I want to place on the record my and the committee's appreciation of Council officers who have provided ongoing support to the committee. I want to acknowledge in particular Ms Lipton and Ms Rode. Finally, on behalf of my fellow committee members, Ernest Starback and Carol Pagnon, I want to thank Mr Boardman for his unwavering support of the committee, his insights and professionalism. So thank you for that, administrators.
Thank you, Mr Nguyen. Thank you for your report. And I'll now hand over to Mr Boardman as mover of accepting your report to make any further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Nguyen, for your very kind comments. It indeed has been an absolute pleasure to work with you in your capacity as independent chair of the Casey Audit and Risk Committee, and also Carol and Ernest. Your detailed analysis of the June meeting and the activities that were conducted in the June is really just a snapshot of the voluminous work that the committee really undertakes, and I think the acknowledgement to council officers who have been instrumental in providing timely and comprehensive reporting and support to the committee is absolutely meritorious in its noting. We deal with some very tough subjects. We deal with some very comprehensive and detailed report. We have relationships to manage with our internal auditors, with our external auditors, and in that regard we do thank VAGO as in their capacity as external auditors and HLB Man Judd in their capacity as internal auditors. There is a number of ongoing internal audits that we will be briefed upon at the September committee meetings that you've referenced, Mr. Nguyen. I think we have 2 meetings in September, which will both culminate in the final meetings that I will be a member of the committee. And I was very pleased to be updated from our CFO today that the external audit is tracking very, very well, and we should have a closeout report in time for the September 3rd meeting. So it is very appropriate for me to pay the courtesy back to yourself, Mr. Nguyen. You have been genuinely an exemplary chair. You've been very transparent, very, very supportive to Carol, Ernest, myself. Your words to council officers clearly demonstrate your support to them. And I've been involved in many audit and risk committees in various guises over many years. And I can say quite wholeheartedly that this is undoubtedly one of the most effective, an exemplar of good governance, good leadership and good management, and the support function that we provide to council, I am quite confident, is acknowledged very widely throughout the organisation. So I firmly place on the record my very sincere support to you, John, and to Carol and Ernest.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank Mr. Nguyen for his report this evening, and to each of the members of the Audit and Risk Committee, Carol Gagnon, Ernst Staybeck and Cameron Boardman. I note that reading this report, this is one of these reports that its brevity underlies the massive amount of work that goes into not only attending this meeting, but preparing for a meeting such as this. An item title such as Good Governance Update only serves to highlight the amount of work that goes into that part of the meeting, and that is only one part of the meeting. Another part of the meeting deals with risk management. And again, there is a deep amount of knowledge from each of the members of the committee that we are grateful for, that they bring to this community. And I want to thank each of them for doing that and for the work that they'll continue to do, that they've done in the past and continue to do into the future. Being a member of these sorts of committees is a significant responsibility which each of them has taken on and done in an exemplary manner. And I want to place on the record my thanks to them for that. And with those comments, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And once again, thank you. We are ever grateful, Mr. Boardman, your willingness to be our representative on the Audit Committee for the duration of our tenure here at the City of Casey. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. And thank you, Mr. Nguyen, for the role that you have played and for bearing with us this afternoon as well. I bid you good afternoon. Thank
you.
I now move on to item 5.5, which is the Climate Resilient Casey Plan. Do I have a mover for the report?
Chair, I will move item 5.5.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second.
Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman.
Chair, if I just have a moment to
Certainly.
get to this very voluminous report, but I will again preface my comments by saying that I fully endorse the plan and particularly the actions contained within the plan. And I do so not from a position of philosophy or ideology, as I have stated previously, but one from absolute practicality. This is a report that is not just a requirement under various statutory functions, and I'll come to those in a moment, but it is one that in any sense of its interpretation and delivery is just absolute common sense. The thinking, the evaluation, the analysis and those tangible identified actions cannot in any way be seen as anything but positive developments for the well-being of all residents and business within the municipality. but also very productive developments in ensuring that the municipality and its environs are focused on sustainability, on preservation, and on ensuring that the amenity, lifestyle and livability of the municipality now and into the future is protected. It is really an exemplary piece of work, the one that cuts through all the noise that unfortunately does dominate this debate, to look at those key drivers, those key actions which really are there to improve amenity and lifestyle and livability factors, rather than meeting what could be construed as ideological factors. Notwithstanding that those matters are very important, but I think what is lost in the debate and why this action plan is so critical is those actual deliverables, the key implementables that go to ensuring that we can meet our statutory obligations, but we can also improve the quality of life for all our residents accordingly. I did mention the legislative context that's as relevant to this plan, and there is both national legislative requirements and there are state legislative requirements. On the national front, the National Climate Resilience and Adaptation Strategy, which is due to be released next year, does provide a framework for national action on climate adaptation. It emphasises the role of all levels of governments, including local governments, so it clearly stipulates what is the requirement of all levels of government, or in our context, local government, in understanding and communicating climate risks, building resilient systems, supporting resilient communities, economic resilience and governance and partnerships. So this national framework is something that will apply to every municipality in the country, and one in which that there needs to be a framework to meet the strategic requirements, and this is what we are adopting tonight. The Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act of 1999 is the central piece of environment protection legislation in the country. This does provide the legal framework for how we manage important flora, fauna, ecological communities and heritage plans, and again there is a role and responsibility, a very important one of that, for local government, which is articulated in this plan. From the Victorian Government perspective, specifically the Environment Act of 1987 and the Victorian Climate Change Act of 2017 did formalise the responsibility of local government insofar as addressing climate change mitigation adaptation. And the 2020 Local Government Act did take this further in ensuring that local governments address climate change through strategic planning, governance and community engagement. And those matters, again, are addressed in this particular plan. It is therefore important to note, beyond the statutory requirements, the absolute facts of what have been the extreme weather events in this municipality in the last 5 years. And they're clearly described from a date, from their categorisation and from their impact on page 12 of the plan, or page 153 of the council papers. And these include the 2023 heatwave, 2022 flooding, and Mr Belmar's alluded to that in an earlier agenda item, and we have another agenda item that we'll be discussing this in further detail tonight. Further storm events in 2021, heatwave storms in 2020, storm heatwaves, bushfires in 2019. So there's no denying that these weather events, particularly of an extreme nature, are increasing. The factors behind that are well discussed in various forms, but again, I get back to the point of how do we implement a plan that has adaptation and mitigation at the forefront of those key considerations, and this is what this plan is seeking to do. I just want to talk about a number of the actions, and just to again go into just a little bit of detail as to why this is quite important, because it's one thing, as I've said in my opening remarks, that we can talk about the problem, but unless we're actually addressing the response to this, then the problem becomes manifestly unachievable to be addressed. So the objectives that we are looking to implement as a consequence of this particular policy form around 4 strategic objectives. They're nature and biodiversity, council infrastructure, assets and services, community wellbeing, resilience, and planning for a safe future. And underpinning all this is the planning framework to ensure that we have more usability, greater reliance on sustainable energy sources, looking at improving our tree canopy, which we'll also be discussing at a later agenda item, ensuring that we have adequate planning controls over the management of our current flora and fauna, and that we increase aspects of natural habitat as best as possible through the planning measures. The balance of land use is critical to the successful implementation of a policy such as this, and the actions that are contained within this particular strategy do outline those actions, those specific deliverables, the timeframes, and potential budget implications and other considerations that are pretty critical. So overall, Chair, I want to again place on the record my appreciation to council officers that have been so comprehensive in not just looking at what our statutory obligations are, not just looking at some of the noise that exists, unfortunately, in this debate, but focusing on what the real community impacts and benefits by implementing and devising such a strategy this will deliver now and into the future. It is very assuring to me that future councils and this organisation will be well placed over the 5 years of this strategy to implement those actions against the targeted requirements, against the strategic objectives I've said as I've just outlined, to meet all of those requirements, to ensure that the City of Casey improves its livability, that it gets the right balance between urban growth and amenity, and also ensuring that all of those aspects of resilience, sustainability are met consequently as articulated in the plan. And I think this is a very important piece of work, one which the community should be very interested in. And I note that the level of community feedback has been extremely strong, that has provided an endorsement of all of the aspects that exist within the plan itself. And with those words, I'm very pleased to move the recommendation as put.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. In seconding this motion, I thank Mr Boardman for his comments, and I hope that I don't repeat too many of the things that he has said, but I think it's important for me to place on the record my support of this piece of work, and note that this is a robust piece of work which has been prepared following significant research, and this is not a policy, not that any policy of this council is ever developed in a manner that's other than appropriately, but this is a policy that is robust. It contains a lot of background work with respect to the research that has gone into developing a number of actions which are real actions, which are things that council can do now and into the next 5 years. I note that the report focuses specifically on the heightened risks that are faced by Casey with respect to the issues of age, gender, socioeconomic status, people living with a disability, ethnicity or linguistically diverse background, Indigenous populations, substance abuse, family violence and health conditions. And in a number of those, Casey, well, in all of those, Casey has issues that it peculiarly is required to approach. I note in reading the report as well, and Mr Boardman has highlighted this, that the report points to the number of events that have occurred in the last 5 years that we have directly experienced. I note as well that the report contains a heat map for Melbourne, which identifies that ourselves and the City of Melton face particular challenges with respect to the heat island effect, and I'll have more to say about that later in another motion that I'll be speaking on this evening. Ultimately, my key takeaway and reflection on this report is we often ask, well, what can I do about climate change? What can I do right now? Well, at the City of Casey, we've identified over 60 things that we can do right now. And I note that we've taken a number of steps already since 2015, which have had the impact of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions between 2015 and 2022 by 59%. By doing active things such as upgrading street lighting to LEDs and switching street lighting to renewable energy from a power purchase agreement. So they are real fundamental things that council can do, which council has done. And as I said, another 60 plus strategies that we can do to adapt. And they are achievable, they are real, they're not pie in the sky goals. There are things that council can do right now, such as preparing stormwater management guidelines to provide guidance on stormwater treatment to deliver a climate resilient city, to continue to ensure that council undertakes the replacement and planting of street trees removed due to extreme weather events such as storm and bushfire with species appropriate for the local area. They're just two. I could go on and I won't because it's a long meeting this evening. But I just want to just focus on that point that for members of the community out there who wonder what can I do, what can Casey do? Well, this report tells you what council can do, and I want to thank all those members of council who have worked on this report. This is a very important piece of work which aims to meet the challenge that we face in the future. And with those comments, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I note how engaged the community is with these issues, and in fact think that council should be moving more quickly than the actions that are outlined. But I think that's a very positive response. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Move to item 5.6, the Berwick Village Commercial Waste Collection Policy. Could I please have a mover for the recommendation?
Yes, I will move this.
Thank you, Mr Belmar.
Seconded, Chair.
And thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation this night is that Council approves the updated Berwick Village Commercial Waste Collection Policy and revoke the Berwick Village Commercial Waste Policy adopted on the 18th of December 2018. And I note as follows: the City of Casey has managed waste collection at Berwick Village since 2008. The service was set up upon request from traders. The businesses in High Street are part of a special charge scheme to cover the cost of waste collection, bin cleaning and litter clearance in and around the compounds. The policy that is attached maintains this method of waste collection. It has a compulsory review cycle of 4 years. I want to thank those council officers and those traders who have taken this step of ensuring uniformity in waste collection in this active part of our city, and to ensure that it is always presented in its best for members of the community. And with those comments, I'm happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, I'll endorse Mr Belmar's comments and note that I have reviewed the proposed policy and agreed with the methodology and the framework and the consultation that has gone into it, and are pleased to support the recommendation as put.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.7 is the Casey Coastal Framework. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Chair, I will move the recommendation items 5.7.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second it.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman, please speak to your motion.
Chair, this is really an extraordinary piece of work, and it's demonstrated through its public significance by the extraordinary level of consultation, engagement, particularly from the potential affected communities at Warneet, Cannons Creek, Blind Bight and Tooradin. And I want to say that again, the potentially affected communities. This was a project that was funded through the Department of Transport and Planning Coastal Planning Grants Program. I think we were first briefed upon this particular project mid last year, particularly insofar as the comprehensiveness of the modelling that has now been depicted within the framework and the analysis, and importantly the aspect of community engagement that was a crucial part of the input to the findings within the framework itself. It must be noted that this is scenario planning. It is not something which has a fixed expectation. It is scenario planning based upon the research and the identified potential scenarios in the Victorian Coastal Management Framework. So this is set by the state government around what some potential scenarios could be that would affect the entire Victorian coastline over a period from now to 2100 or 2100, whichever way you want to describe it. So within a 70 to 80 year framework. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. But specifically what we are doing tonight is adopting the Casey Coastal Framework, so the findings of this particular piece of research that has been, as I said, several months in the making and development. We are recommending to undertake further investigation and a review of the inundation controls applying to Casey's coastline, including the preparation of a planning report to support a future planning scheme amendment to the Casey planning scheme, which will be an extraordinarily detailed, lengthy, comprehensive piece of work that will be substantially informed by this particular framework, and one that I think will be undoubtedly of interest to not just the affected communities, but many other Victorian coastal communities, because this is something which will have some significant impacts into the future, particularly as it relates to Casey's planning schemes and other neighbouring planning schemes. And also to receive the report at a future council meeting, which will not be us, this will be the elected council post the council elections in October, to consider the findings in the review of the existing inundation planning controls. So we are adopting the framework. There is an endorsement of the research methodology and the findings within that based upon the scenarios that are in the Victorian Coastal Management Framework, but we are empowering the organisation to undertake that vital, important work to assess what the real future implications are based upon what this particular report has identified. The report itself is very voluminous. It is several, I think, 100 pages. It is one that requires significant time to digest all of the findings, implications, the inputs, the data and the methodology around the data to give the veracity to its findings. But it is also a report that needs to be considered again, not just within the implications on what will happen to Casey's coastal, but potentially, I should say, what happened to Casey's coastal regions, but the whole state indeed. And the report goes into discussion around that. The reason why this is important is not just because we are very much aware of the Ramsar Convention of Wetlands of international importance as its declaration applies to the Western Port area. We're not just aware of and very much proud of the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, which is something which has been in play for, I think, nearly three decades or maybe longer in Western Port. But it is important from the basis that this will have an impact on future decision making, and that gets back to the planning report and the potential amendments that will be required under the Casey planning scheme in the future. And there is a number of residents that potentially, and I'll say potentially, could be impacted upon this. There is a number of existing businesses that potentially could be impacted, and consequently, there is a significant amount of council infrastructure which potentially could be impacted, all of which will require a lot more analysis and a lot more detailed orientation to future council decision makings. So the risk profile is quite straightforward, and this is where we get into some of the detail of the report, that there are a number of scenarios accounted for as they relate to temporary inundation and erosion due to potential sea level rises, as they could potentially relate rate to there being no sea level rises to being there a sea level rise of 0.2 metres, of 0.5 metres, of 0.8 metres, and this is also calibrated over a period of time as those scenarios would be planned over a horizon that includes 2040, 2070 and 2100, as I've said. Specifically the risk analysis as it applies to those 4 coastal communities that I've mentioned, and also Pearsdale, with also an analysis of the potential impact that the rural and conservation areas within the coastal zones outside of the residential and commercial areas could have. It is, in some regards, a very sobering read. If by 2100, or 2100 to be more precise, there is sea level rise due to erosion or temporary or even more permanent inundation between 0.5 and 0.8, which is the measurements that are consistently discussed within the Victorian Coastal Management Framework, the risks to those communities will be quite significant. And whilst I in no way want to be seen as being an alarmist, one thing that this particular framework provides through a comfort factor is identifying what potential risks would be, allowing the community and the council to think through the implications of those risks, and now embarking on a process to further evaluate from a realistic and an evidence-based scenario planning to make any other decisions, interventions, and address those consequences in the future. It is a significant process which is yet to be undertaken, but this vital first step has provided the analysis which now then provides the veracity and the basis for that future work to commence. And as I said, that will be something that will be undertaken over many years in the future. I do want to conclude by really giving a very strong thank you to the communities who were engaged through this particular process. There was over 197 individual community members. They attended a range of in-person activities. There was a range of online activities. There was 5 pop-up sessions. There were 2 community meetings. We received a number of written submissions. And there was also a direct mail to 1,587 coastal residents. And I think insofar as us meeting our communication obligations to the community to be completely transparent with this work, to provide the basis of what potential scenarios may entail, and then to have the community involved in this process to discuss the issues, to examine the risks, to look at the research frameworks and methodology, to look at the consequences, to be part of the current and future decision making, really was, again, something from a communications and community engagement standpoint, a very beneficial and positive process. I do conclude where I started, that these are potential scenarios. They are scenarios that have been articulated through the state government's Victorian Coastal Management Framework, but one where we need to have that conversation, because if any of these scenarios do tragically come to fruition, and we all hope that they do not, but if they do, then unfortunately tough decisions will need to be made. But it is the first part of a much more involved, comprehensive process, one which really has been something that we have had a significant degree of interest in over many months from a council perspective, and the final report, albeit detailed and comprehensive as it is undoubtedly a must-read for any affected community members within our coastal area.
Thank you, Mr Borden. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. In seconding this motion, I'm mindful of the following comment in the officer's report, which reads, under the Local Government Act, Council has a responsibility to inform the community of potential risks related to climate change, as well as ensuring that decisions are informed by these risks. For Casey's coastal areas, temporary event-based inundation and inundation due to sea level rise and associated shoreline retreat are the main challenges. The coastal framework is an important piece of work which seeks to meet that responsibility that Council has. I don't want to repeat the comments made by Mr. Boardman, but I want to thank those members of the community who have engaged with this challenge. As Mr. Boardman has identified, this is planning for these risks. There is no certainty that the future is as set out in these documents, but certainly these documents provide a baseline for future work. I note that future work will include, or may include, further planning reports, undertaking a local hazard assessment required to support a review of planning controls in Casey's local areas, planning scheme updates or amendments, regional adaptation planning, and targeted community adaptation planning at a local scale at priority locations being Tooradin, Warneet and Cannons Creek. So these are real challenges which our coastal community here at Casey is facing, and this piece of work puts in their hand some of the best knowledge that we have at this time. And it's important to note that this is an area of our scientific knowledge which is always continuing to expand. New ways are found to do things. New ways of assessing risks are found, and at present this is an important piece of work which allows us to start that process of embarking upon potential future strategic work which could result in amendments to our planning scheme. I also want to note that at the moment our planning scheme does seek to address some of these issues, so it's not as if there is nothing there at the moment. We do have particular controls in the planning scheme which identify that there is future risk, but more work needs to be done. And with those comments, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. I put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. We are not yet halfway through the agenda. I'll just note that. 5.8, Greening Casey 2024, 2030, 2050, and we're up to page 404 of the agenda for those that are following it. Could I have a mover for the recommendation?
Yes, I will move this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Seconder?
Chair, seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. It seems that this evening we have a number of reports that deal with issues to do with climate and the response that Casey can have to that. The recommendation tonight is that Council endorse Greening Casey in line with our commitment to living Melbourne, our metropolitan urban forest and Council's overarching environment strategy. I'll be brief in my comments because this is a policy that has significant community support. The city has approximately 660,000 trees, with 360,000 street trees and park trees managed by council and 300,000 trees on private property. Although this number may appear substantial, it is significantly lower compared to the tree canopy cover in surrounding areas and the wider metropolitan region of Melbourne, standing at just 11.3%. That comment is taken from tonight's council papers. What council wants to do is to increase the 11.3% to 15% by 2030. That represents a 31% increase in tree canopy over Casey. The reason to increase that tree canopy is that it will assist in a number of things, but one of those is in the heat island effect, which is a way of reducing the impact of climate change and those significantly hot days, which we've referred to in an earlier motion tonight. I note that there's been a community survey and community engagement with respect to this policy, and the community survey revealed the following insight. 95% of residents supported more trees being planted in the City of Casey, with 78% wanting a lot more trees and 17% wanting a few more trees. 95% of respondents would like council to invest more in street and park trees. Well, for my part, council's heard that loud and clear. I don't think there's been too many surveys that council could take that would have that sort of response. I want to note that there has been a real engagement by the community in the importance of street trees. Anecdotally, as part of our briefings, we've identified that there has been a shift in community sentiment around this issue, and it just shows that both with time, with work by council and with engagement by the community with issues related to the work that can be done locally, a response such as 95% wanting more trees just shows that engagement and the response that council can give to that engagement. And with those comments, I am happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, in the interest of time, I fully endorse Mr Belmar's comments. It is undoubtedly a worthwhile goal to increase Casey's tree canopy by a third from the current 11.3% to 15%, which is the target contained within the Greenie Casey strategy. And having reviewed the strategy, its actions, its environmental policy, strategic and commercial implications, I'm very satisfied that this is more than a worthwhile endeavour and one which I fully support.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.9 is parking for the future Cranbourne Community Hospital. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Chair, I'll move the recommendation as put.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Chair, I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, I'll make some very brief comments. This is a relatively unique recommendation to seek Council's endorsement to formally write to the Victorian Health Minister, the Honourable Mary-Ann Thomas, and also to the State Member for Cranbourne, Ms Pauline Richards, outlining our significant concerns regarding the provision of car parking for staff users and visitors at the new Cranbourne Community Hospital. The construction of the Cranbourne Community Hospital is being completed at pace. Anyone who's walked or driven past the area will see that the building is well under development and that it is on schedule to be completed, I think, later this year. By endorsing this recommendation, we will include in the correspondence detail around our understanding and our analysis that there will be a substantial impact caused by the insufficient supply of car parking that will have on the broader Casey complex precinct, the recreational facilities that exist down in that precinct, both for users and visitors, but also in particularly for future visitors and users of the hospital. We acknowledge that there is a number of allocated car parking spaces to be constructed as a consequence of the hospital, but we also note that in adjacent to the area there are numerous currently free car parking spaces for users of the recreational facilities, and that is definitely something that Council wants to maintain and preserve. We also want to ensure that the correspondent articulates options to be considered for additional car parking to adequately meet the anticipated demands of the hospital, and in the Council report we have articulated and described what those options could be. But we note in particular that in the absence of adequate parking supply for hospital staff, users and visitors, that we may be placed in a situation where we would need to consider measures to ensure that our own parking spaces that I've articulated in the recreational precinct are protected for staff and users of those facilities, and that we can maintain the existing stock under the existing conditions as best as possible. This is something that we're seeking direct ministerial intervention in because we have identified the inadequacies as I've articulated, and one that does need to be addressed not just by the state government but also by the proposed user of or the proposed occupier of the Cranbourne Community Hospital, being Monash Health. So with those words and that introduction and the background, Chair, I'm very pleased to move the recommendation and trust that our advocacy efforts do result in a positive outcome for all parties involved.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. I want to endorse the comments of Mr Boardman, and I want to endorse the steps that have been taken by Council to ensure that this issue is addressed in the best way possible. The current best evidence we have is that there is a potential shortfall, and if that shortfall occurs, the pressure will then be on the Casey Complex precinct nearby, which services staff and users of council sporting and community facilities, including Cranbourne Library, Casey Race and Casey Stadium. Anecdotally and experience in this area of work, and the officer's report informs me that car parking provision is a matter that traffic engineers can engage with and can arrive at data, which is real data, which is a mathematical issue as to how many car spots have to be provided. That's how you know that there's a shortfall. And so when I endorse the council take the step in ensuring that that traffic management work which is done, those car park counts which are done, we'll be able to demonstrate that a shortfall will have a real impact on the community. And with those comments, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I think in adopting this recommendation, we note that this is an absolutely vital service for this community, but we also know, and having frequented that location personally, that it's already an extremely busy area where the demand for car parking at peak periods is already at its maximum. So we really want to set up the establishment of the hospital for success locally and for people to be able to access the services that they need in a timely manner and can access them through the road network effectively. And we know just how difficult that is likely to be with that extra demand. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.10 is the road discontinuance, Soldiers Road, Clyde North. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Yes, I'll move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Seconder.
Second it.
Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. This is a motion that's required by legislation, but being the Local Government Act, but also it's important to understand the reason why this motion is being moved. The officer's report tonight provides the following short background. The subject land forms part of the Soldiers Road, Clyde North Road Reserve, located near the corner of Thompson's Road, Clyde North, as is contained in the council papers. A request was received from the Victorian Schools Building Authority to discontinue the road, for the road to be consolidated into the development of the abutting Clyde North Secondary School, which is its interim name, to open in Term 1, 2025. The discontinuance of the road for consolidation into the abutting school site implements the Clyde North Precinct Structure Plan. I have read that into the record this evening because it succinctly points out why this step is required. This road will in the future be within the bounds of the school grounds. It's therefore appropriate that this discontinuance occur, but it's also appropriate that we note and understand the community frustration with traffic congestion in that part of the world, and this discontinuance of this road will occur at an appropriate time to ensure that frustration is kept to a or is managed. It's important to note that in any planning decisions of this type, there are always competing and sometimes conflicting demands which are required to be balanced, and on this occasion that balance requires that this road be ultimately discontinued. I know that there's been a short number of submissions which have been considered in coming to this conclusion, and with those comments I am happy to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, some very brief comments. As part of recent advocacy that Council undertook, I was photographed in this exact precinct a few weeks ago for an Age Media article, and I did in fact travel down this affected part of Soldiers Road right at the time of school pickup from the neighbouring Hillcrest Christian College, which is quite a large school in itself, and can say without hesitation that this is a desperately required process. It really is an extraordinarily congested area, particularly school drop-off and pick-up, and with the proposed Clyde North Secondary School, which is the interim name for the public secondary school that's being currently constructed down there. This is a significant requirement to ensure that that all road infrastructure meets the requirements from not just the existing school but the new school and the residents under the Clyde North Precinct Structure Plan. It is also a matter that's been advocated quite significantly through the member for Berwick, Mr Brad Batten, and the member for South East Metropolitan Region, the Honourable Michael Galea. We acknowledge their advocacy and thank them for that. They equally have been bipartisan in their approaches to us and identifying the necessity around this particular administrative requirement. But it also must be firmly placed on the record, Chair, that this is part of our ongoing advocacy around the extension of Thompsons Road itself. This is the number one infrastructure project that we are currently advocating to the state government. Once the Clyde North Precinct Structure Plan and all the developments are completed in this particular area, the necessity for Thompsons Road to be expanded and to meet the current requirements and the future anticipated needs of the community will be obvious, and we certainly encourage the state government to come to the party on funding the extension of Thompsons Road in a timely manner, and I'm confident that the future council, as elected in October, will remain very strong advocates to see that through to completion.
Thank you. I will put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.11 is 25S Serpils Way, Cranbourne East. Is there a mover for the recommendation?
Chair, I will move that recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, it's an administrative recommendation to ensure that we acquire the land for future construction of part of the Casey Fields Boulevard. This is action that will be taken in accordance with the Land Acquisition and Compensation Act. There has been a market value of the subject land, which is currently located at 25S Serpils Way, Cranbourne East. That is subject to a confidential attachment that I have reviewed, and I am satisfied that it complies with our valuation policies and procurement policies and asset disposal and other necessary governance requirements, and also meets our legislative obligations. As a consequence of this, we are authorising the Chief Executive Officer to transfer the land on behalf of Council insofar as the valuation and the necessity to meet the requirement under the future Croxall Employment Precinct Structure Plans, and we also are delegating for the payments made in accordance with the Planning and Environment Act, consistent with the confidential attachments I've articulated. Having again reviewed the necessity, the statutory requirements, and also the valuation aspects in both the public and the confidential attachments, I'm satisfied that we have met all our legislative and other policy considerations, and I'm pleased to endorse the recommendation as put.
Thank you. Anything to add, Mr Belmar?
No, I adopt the comments of Mr Boardman and confirm I've considered the papers and considered the confidential attachment.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.12 is payment from the Contributions Plan Reserve. Is there a mover for the recommendation?
Yes, I will move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And a seconder?
Second, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Similarly, as to the last motion, this is an administrative motion. The recommendation is that, subject to Council entering into an agreement for the provision of contribution planned land project, Council authorises the Chief Executive Officer or delegate to make payment from the Contribution Plan Reserve in accordance with the confidential attachment of this report. I have considered the papers. I've considered the attached confidential report. I note that Council is currently negotiating with a landowner on the terms for the provision of a significant DCP land project located in the area subject to the Clyde Development Contributions Plan. I note that Council has considered it's appropriate to bring this motion to Council tonight to allow a payment to occur. I endorse Council officers to pursue that action. And with those comments and noting that this motion is required because of legislative requirements, I am happy to move the motion.
Thank you. Mr Boardman.
Chair, I endorse Mr Belmar's comments and note that equally I have familiarised myself with the requirements and justifications around the recommendation and note its adherence to our statutory obligations and am pleased to second it accordingly.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.13, staged delivery of contributions plan active open space. Is there a mover for the recommendation?
I will move the recommendation at item 5.13, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second it.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, some very brief comments in relation to the recommendation to endorse the implementation of the staged delivery model for the contributions plan. The proposed model would ensure that we stage the delivery of an active open space project in accordance with the availability and certainty of the co-funding streams. We would expend the contributions plan funded stream of the project and particularly in the first stage of the project in accordance with the relevance contributions plan project scope, and we would deliver subsequent stages of a project where co-funding via council rates revenue and or Commonwealth of Victorian grants become available. On page 488 of the public council reports, we have identified the active open spaces and the planned funding split from the proposed contributions plans, the rates, grants and the total of the proposed projects, whereby through subsequent adoption of this recommendation, the staged delivery model will be implemented. The benefits for this are quite understandable. Specifically, it will facilitate early delivery of the active open space projects for the community. It will facilitate opportunities for innovation in the delivery of these projects. It certainly has a significant emphasis on minimising financial risk to the council and to the organisation as a whole, and it also provides a sector-leading approach to potential changing conditions which may occur within the 5-year anticipated stage delivery of the projects as articulated. Having reviewed the analysis, the justification, the benefit realisation and the statutory requirements of this recommendation, I am satisfied that we are meeting all of our requirements, and this undoubtedly will result in a much more effective, streamlined and a leading approach, as I've mentioned, to delivering active open spaces via our Capital Works program. And with those words, Chair, I am pleased to move the recommendation as put.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.14 is Centre Road flooding. Is there a mover for the recommendation on page 489?
Yes, I'll move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Chair, I'm moving the following recommendation. That Council note the recurring flooding over Centre Road in Hallam and Narre and actions taken to respond. And secondly, the Council continues to advocate to Melbourne Water and other relevant government agencies to expedite planning and approvals required to commence capacity improvements in the Hallam Valley floodplain. I note from the officer's report that the primary reason for flooding over Centre Road is inadequate capacity within the Hallam Valley floodplain. That is a polite way of putting the following proposition, and that is that the plan that's found at page 494, which shows the Hallam Valley floodplain, it shows the Casey Green residential estate, the Rimfar Drive industrial estate, and then the point at which the flooding occurs. The lack of capacity is effectively that the floodplain cannot cope with the amount of water that's entering into it, and at those times when it can't cope, what occurs is that water collects over the road and prevents those residents and those people using the industrial estate from being able to get in and out of those estates, as they only have one way in and out. I note that in the report there is a number of ways that have been proposed to deal with the matter. They include flood monitoring, to investigate reopening of the Centre Road Bridge, to lift Centre Road, drainage maintenance, and all of these have been considered, and it is appropriate that the work continue, but the Melbourne Water also consider what response it can undertake as the body with the statutory responsibility over floodplains to work with council in ensuring that these flooding events can be reduced over time by undertaking the sort of work that has been identified. And with those comments, I'm happy to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, briefly, I endorse Mr Belmar's comments. This is a very important recommendation to deal with a matter that is central to the Helm-Narre Warren communities. We do note that Melbourne Water is the Regional Floodplain Management Authority and ultimately is responsible for undertaking not just the maintenance of the drainage and the floodplain itself, but also the infrastructure upgrades, which are still, unfortunately, a few years away, but there are some interim initiatives that Council identified that we aim to work with Melbourne Water to try and address immediate mitigations, which are very necessary. We do note that whilst Melbourne Water recently undertook some partial cleaning of the area, they cannot do more than that until they conclude a comprehensive ecological assessment that needs to understand where there is any prevalence of protected federal fauna and flora species within the channels, and as a consequence this is a very methodical statutory process and one which we do note needs to be completed sequentially. So whilst we will make every endeavour through our advocacy to ensure that Melbourne Water can expedite these works and to provide any actions against the interim initiatives that we have identified, this matter is serious enough for us to heighten our advocacy, which is exactly what the recommendation is seeking tonight. And with that, I'm pleased to second the recommendation as put.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.15 is endorsement of governance documents, and I note this is the continuing review process that we have undertaken. This set of documents includes the Council of Communications Policy, Audit and Risk Committee Charter, Public Interest Disclosure Policy and Community Engagement Policy. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Chair, I will move the recommendation as put.
Thank you. Mr Boardman, seconder.
Yes, I'll second it.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, and thank you for your introductory comments. I don't propose to speak in any great length around the endorsement of these governance documents. I did speak at length, and Mr Belmar did as well, when we were releasing these documents for public consultation, and as you've identified, this is part of a sequence of the governance improvement measures that we are implementing here in preparation for the return of elected councillors in October. Mr Nguyen, in his agenda item 5.1, did talk about the updates that have been made to the Audit and Risk Committee Charter and the consideration that the committee itself has contributed to that particular charter improvement, which includes some clarity over the membership tenure, the role of the chair and independent members, and Mr Nguyen has already discussed what those specific requirements and changes and expectations were. The Council of Communications Policy, as we did discuss at the previous council meeting, does provide the framework for mayors and councillors to effectively communicate to support the clear, timely, transparent, responsive and accurate information to the community, and also facilitates adherence to the Council Code of Conduct, in particular the requirements under the behavioural aspects in the Council Code of Conduct to ensure that councils are aware of what their obligations from a communications basis, both externally and internally to staff, and ensure that they adhere to same. It also outlines what the role from public communication of various council spokespersons, whether it be the mayor or councillors or the CEO, and what their expectations and the support provided to them would be in the circumstances. And the Charter of Human Rights has been reviewed, and its applicability has been included through the freedom of thought, conscience, religion and belief, and also the freedom of expression. It does allow councillors to have individual views, but it also states that these councillors cannot speak on behalf of the City of Casey. They need to be quite clear under the communications policy that they are speaking in individual capacity, and that must be expressly intended. The public interest disclosure policy is developed in accordance with the statutory framework, which is Section 58 of the Public Interest Disclosure Act. It is straightforward around the clarity, its application, and the requirements of the organisation and councillors' requirements, and the community engagement policy is where there is some changes that have been implemented as a consequence of the public engagement exercise. It does clarify the objective sections. It does further streamline and provide a greater basis to the approach to community engagement to incorporate aspects of different policy overlays. It does provide clarity over the levels of community engagements and the types of community engagements, and also ensures that, again, there is specific clarity on the expectations and the adherence to the Council Code of Conduct accordingly. These are very important documents. We've said that numerous times around the entire suite of governance documents and frameworks that incoming councillors will need to abide by. They do not work in isolation. They inform and provide continuity to each other, and it is absolutely imperative that councillors, council staff and others who work within the organisation are aware of their obligations under the various policies, adhere to them, and ensure that they provide the best level of delivery in accordance with their governance, their statutory obligations and professional and community expectations. And with those words, Chair, I am pleased to endorse the recommendation and the latest tranche of organisational and governance documents accordingly.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. Can I adopt the comments made by Mr Boardman and confirm that I have considered the policies at council briefings, considered them when they've been back to us after community consultation with respect to one of the policies, and note that this is our continuing work to ensure the council is best prepared for the return of elected councillors.
Thank you, and thank you to those officers involved in the compilation of these reports and the process. It's been quite an intensive and comprehensive process. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.16 is the instrument and appointment of authorisation under the Planning and Environment Act. It's an administrative decision. Do I have a mover and a seconder?
Yes, I'll move it.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
Mr Boardman, thank you. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. I move this administrative motion, which is required under the Planning and Environment Act, to ensure that council officers have an appropriate delegation provided from a council meeting. I've read the documents and I've noted that staff have been both added and removed, and I want to thank those council officers who take the careful work of ensuring that the appropriate delegations are in place at all times.
Thank you. Anything to add, Mr Boardman?
The brevity of our comments in no way undermine the significance of this exercise. It is a vital statutory requirement under the Planning and Environment Act to ensure that we categorise those council officers who are tasked with statutory obligation under the Act. And for the reasons Mr Belmar has articulated, I fully endorse the recommendation.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. That concludes the officer reports for this afternoon. I move to item 6, which is the consideration of reports of committees. of which there are a number on page 558. I simply note those. Item 7 is petitions. There are none tabled for the meeting today. Item 8, late reports. There are also no late reports. Urgent business at item 9. There is none. Item 10 is closed council, and there are no closed council reports for the meeting this afternoon. So I wish to say thank you to those who've persevered with us this afternoon in the gallery and those online. I thank the officers for their work in contributing to the agenda today, and I formally close the meeting. Good evening.